Louder?
Yeah.
But then I can't see my paper, which is maybe a good idea. So, no, because I speak with my hands, that's even worse. So thanks a lot for the invitation. Thanks a lot for the translators, because I did not hand in a paper beforehand, which makes it really difficult. It's a big honor to be here, and also a great joy. We already had like 2 exciting hours with a kind of reading group kind of structure with several collectives, including the Tentative Collective, and also being on a panel again. Apparently it's always in Paris with Ravi, who told me this morning that he sticks to the rule of 7 pages, 3 minutes per page means 21 minutes. And I said, like, that's how I count as well, but then it turns out longer all the time. So if I'm too long, it's his fault. So it's not just an honor or it's not exciting, but I think it's a very important and timely adventure that I'm happy to be a part of. At least in the beginning, in a couple of weeks' time, I'll be in Shanghai. Also in this framework, talking about questions of temporalities, or what time means in our complex, or I would say like time complex societies. I'm mentioning this today because one of my hypotheses is that we're living in complex societies in a very specific sense, namely within structures that are governed by automatization, computers, machines, algorithms, and where we humans basically play a certain role within complex technologies and technological legal infrastructures, but we're no longer necessarily the center or the decisive factor. This is obviously not to say that the human factor is negligible, but the different configurations of collective intelligence or collaborative actions take on a new importance. And the question is, which ones are best equipped at all for the global problems, the cosmopolitan challenges of the 21st century. So with regards to today, here and now, and in general, I will talk a bit about different versions of what we maybe tend to mix up or use in the same way, or not differentiate enough, like collectives, collaborations, corporations, units, assemblies, ensemble, councils, to just name a few of them. And really this presentation today it's called Keynote, but it's 20 minutes, and my idea is rather to start a discussion, to start a debate with the various collectives. So that's a bit the purpose that I have in this for this 20 minutes. And the focus will be on the present, I mentioned it already, and different collective formats, so to say. And I will end my talk, hopefully if there's enough time, about the future and to what degree we need like different kind of institutions, or we need to rethink the institutions that we have in order to have something like systemic change. And my plaidoyer will be a bit for institutions, but sustainable collaborations between institutions and collectives of various kinds. But before I talk about the present and then the future, let me start with looking back a bit, some historical remarks about this other topic of Cosmopolis, namely artistic research. There's a lot that has been said and written about artistic research, and I definitely won't be able to engage with it, but just a few remarks because it has something to do with institutions as well. Where I come from, or where I live in Berlin, there's a general institutional shift from something like academies of art, Akademie der Künste, to universities of art. So there's a kind of universitization or so of artistic practices. This has of course to do with the interest of artists themselves. There's amazing examples here. If you haven't seen the exhibition yet, do so today, tonight, tomorrow. But it's also very simple questions of funding. You know, it's, academic structures make it often easier to get funding. The historical thing that I want to make you a bit aware of is like when doing research, partly as well philosophers, I just name a few of them, Humboldt, Hegel, Schleiermacher and others. They came up with they were part of a process that changed a bit the concept of what universities mean, And this has something to do with art. It goes together with the invention of a new discipline, namely aesthetics, that didn't exist before. And it goes together with like very concrete formats or settings, something very simple, like in order to get a doctorate, a PhD, before you had to do something like an oral disputatio, where you had to show that you managed the traditional historical knowledge. You were not supposed to produce new knowledge. Only together with this transformation into new modern research universities, there was also the implementation of a written dissertation, no longer oral disputatio, but a written dissertatio, where you had to show actually not that you know the canon, but that you are capable of producing something new. So these things seem to us very, very normal, but they are not. And the reason why I'm mentioning it is because several things that we might also suffer from now, like things like phenomena like having to be creative all the time, having to produce new knowledge all the time, that our intuitions, our flexibility and so on are called into question. These are initially I would say artistic and aesthetic phenomena that were part of the invention of the university. So the reason why I'm mentioning this is to say artistic or aesthetic and research do not come together now, and in very interesting way, as you can see here. They have been part of the same thing from the beginning. So what we understand as research has always been artistic, and what we understand as art in a modern sense has always been influenced by or shaped by research in a way. However, it's also necessary to redefine what this research does and what it comes up with and what it provides. In this by now canonical text by Ravi in Iflux about the post-colonial, I found this really nice quotation. I quote, "This doubling of infrastructures," and you can think also about academic infrastructures, "may also produce a poetics with new aesthetic and political possibilities." This emphasis on infrastructures is very important. I quote again, that infrastructures became the site of new experiments. And that is a bit the focus of my talk and what I would like to discuss afterwards with you and council and others, is what kind of, as I call it, the new collective subject, the new collective intelligences can catalyze or engage in something like sustainable change and infrastructural transformation. And to what degree do they need for this adventure already existing or newly established institutions? Basically, I want us, while thinking about Cosmopolis, to keep in mind the specific collaborations also on an institutional level. So I spoke about collective subjects, and if we hear that, of course, immediately we think of collectives. Collectives are basically groups that share a common interest, that work together, and not necessarily with an economic interest. Otherwise, there would be corporations. And according to Wikipedia, so a very important source, my research, in the political realm, a collective is defined by decentralized or majority rules and decision-making styles. Now, compare that, for example, I want to destabilize a bit this kind of, as if we all know what a collective is. A unit, for example. A unit, when we think of a unit, that's something like a unit of measurement, as a definite magnitude of a quantity, a standard for measurement. However, a social unit is a particle in a structure that is connected to multiple other units. And in this sense, it's clearly different from a collective. It is to be understood as a set of individuals whose character as a unity must come from somewhere else, not from within. So with regards to historical collectives, one can even go so far to say that these collectives were haunted by the question of unity. For example, the Russian revolutionary collectives, and I'm a bit afraid that, with Dehli being here, that they might prove me wrong, but the Russian revolutionary collectives had either communities, committees that represented them, or leaders that united them. And totalitarian collectives, we should keep that in mind, that collectives can also be totalitarian. So let's not forget this danger. Totalitarian collectives acquired their unity via the sacrifice of one of the members in repeated purges. It is fair to say that the collective's nightmare remains the enigma of its unity. So we have the collective, we have the unit, and each time, I want you to keep that in mind and think about it, each time there's a different logic of the relation between the individual or individual features and the general structure. So the collective, the unit, and then as music is also going to play an important role in Cosmopolis already in the next few days, I want to mention the ensemble. Ensemble always has something harmonic. It's obviously so in music, it's so in dance ensembles that are supposed to harmonize together. You know, an orchestra needs a flute and strings and trombone, whatever. And it's supposedly not that one is more important than the other, but they need to, there's no hierarchy, but you need this difference, very different concept than, for example, the unit. You have that also in thermodynamics and mechanics, where it is something like a probability distribution for the stable state of a system. Then we have, as another example, we have like communities. Again, I give you Wikipedia definition for a specific reason. Wikipedia says a community is a small or large social unit, a group of living things who have something in common, such as norms, values, or identity. Communities often share a sense of place that is situated in a given geographical area, for example, a country, a village, a town, or a neighborhood, or in virtual space through communicating platforms. So there's a kind of like organic kind of essence of communicative one. The reason why I quote that is because my favorite theoretician of community is Roberto Esposito, and he says exactly the opposite. What philosophers often do is they do etymological comparisons. And what Roberto Esposito came up with very interestingly is to say, like, in all these words, community, communication, and so on, you have this kernel that is munus. Now we would think, or according to this Wikipedia definition, we would think it's what we all share, right? It's what makes us like communicate with each other. But like what he shows with his etymological research is that no, actually munus means a gap, something lacking, something that needs to be bridged. So in his political theory that becomes very important, that communities should not build, what does it mean to think about communities that are not built on like what everyone shares, but rather of not sharing. And what would be a communication, or a communication of collective intelligences, where it's not about harmony of people that already share something, but whether it's not really the task to learn how to communicate in difference and not as I said, what we share. So I hope it's clear, but nevertheless let me stress it again, I'm not arguing here against communication or community or collectives, on the contrary. Rather I want to make all of us a bit aware, or a bit more sensitive of what exactly we mean when we talk about collectives and what might be needed in order for some progressive, artistic, intellectual, political work. Which finally brings me to council, or the reason why I decided to give this talk, because I started reading about council, the group council, or the collective council, or the council, whatever. So a council, to give a neutral definition by myself, not Wikipedia this time, I worked hard. A council is a group of people who come together to consult, deliberate, or make decisions. Therefore, a council is maybe also defined by a different temporality. It's more flexible. It's not eternal features that bind a council together, or that it's shared by its members. So a council comes together to decide about something, or to negotiate about something. A council may function as a legislation, especially at a town or city or country level, although most legislative bodies at the state or the national level are not considered councils. Councils are first of all important in the political realm because many of us, the first encounter with politics or democracy is via elections or council in schools or universities. So with democratic procedures, often our first contact is via councils. But even more so in politics, councils were, and maybe still are still a serious threat or alternative to traditional representative organs. Think of something like the Räterepublik, the brief existence in Munich and Hungary after the First World War. In French it's République de Conseil, in English it's Soviet republics. So the short-lived revolutionary governments. So Soviet Republic, and we might associate this with the political system of the Soviet Union, which is, however, the absolute wrong way of understanding it. In her famous study on totalitarianism, Hannah Arendt even argues that a republic in which the government is formed of Soviets, worker councils, was more or less the exact opposite of what Lenin and especially Stalin implemented. I quote Arendt, "The conflict between the two systems, the parties and the councils, came to the fore in all 20th century revolutions. The issue at stake was representation versus action and participation." End of quote. Or more recent, more fashionable, maybe in the art world, Negri and Hart stated that although historical workers' council failed in many respects, they should still be reconsidered today, and I would say especially today, given the new media or technological facilities at our disposal. So they should be considered as a fascinating attempt establishing a legislative on the basis of production and of work, of local knowledge and of local intelligence against a kind of independent or protected or detached sphere of politics. Think of all the populist polemics against the bureaucratic political establishment's anti-European kind of resentment. But think as well about all the collective intelligence that is suppressed by unfitting institutions. So very similar to what Negri Hart say about councils and the potential revolutionary potential of councils. It's again Arendt who opposes councils to, I quote, "The party as an institution presupposed either that the citizens' participation in public affairs was guaranteed by other public organs, or that such participation was not necessary, and that newly admitted strata of the population should be content with representation." End of quote. So it's a danger as well to make it too like good and evil. So good councils versus parties, political parties as evil institutions. But nevertheless, I wanted to throw that into the discussion to see the nuances between all these collective organs. It's now 7:32, and my conversation partner somehow needs to leave at 7:30 plus minus 5 minutes. So I'm on page 5 of my, according to the, so maybe as a kind of question, as a kind of introduction, what I got really interested in when I had a look at your work from your main homepage, but also from other projects that you did, is really several, at least 3 elements. Like one is that you operate exactly within this tension that I try to describe. For example, when you define or understand yourselves, I quote, "A council is a group of people who gather to take decisions both for themselves and for those that they represent." So this question of a local knowledge, but also kind of representative self-entitlement. The second one is that council can operate across cultures. It is basically that they combine very different collective intelligences, which is not naturally given to a collective, right? And the third element is that this capacity to operate across cultures is also a prerequisite for what's maybe most important, and again I quote you, namely that to instigate social change, through long-term initiatives. So with regards to cosmopolitical actions, because we're talking about Cosmopolis, or within this format here, cosmopolitical action, it needs operation across cultures as well as sustainable and strategic action. Strategic action meaning not just a locally and temporally like defined action, but like one that takes into account like how to achieve like future effects or so. So these were the three elements that made me that I got interested when I wrote this kind of like 20 minutes keynote leading towards like council as one interesting tension within this possibilities within all the different collectives that exist. So
thank you. I don't know if this works. I hope we can take that video. Did you record this? No. You're a very good spokesperson for council, maybe. I guess our position in Cosmopolis is a bit different because we're not a collective, precisely for a number of reasons that you enumerated. And one is when you talked about the potential derive of a collective politically through going towards totalitarianism. And we decided to the people who direct it, but it's a larger entity in a way. The governance is part of the choice that we're not a collective, and our way to think of sustainable change is precisely related to the way we assemble, the way we create council. So our very belief or bet is that in each project we do, we create situations in which we assemble people from different knowledge, and that very precise assemble will have social impact. So it's extremely important when you assemble, not to assemble people who think in the same way. So each assembly that we create gather point of views that challenge each other, that come from a different perspective. So this is the across culture maybe point that you make. We need people across discipline, across geographies, across history, experiences, forms of knowledge, some very local knowledge, some very further out or side knowledge. And the bet is also that we assemble because people are concerned by the same topic or by the same issue. So they don't agree, but they feel that there's a need to share. It's all very abstract, but I guess one of the projects that we're showing behind this wall that took place in Beirut. Shall I enter to that? Yeah? Okay. And Emma Variola is here? Yes. So I'm not the only council here. Julia is here, so we're a number of people. Emma is the chief editor of this project called the Against Nato Journal. To give you the example precisely of that project, it started in Beirut, was commissioned by an institution called Ashkal Adwan. And the issue we worked on over there came through an encounter with an NGO called Legal Agenda. So again, the issue we decide to work on usually are not ideas that we come with. They are encounter with people on a specific ground. And that has an impact on the entire project. And so that NGO was working among many other things on one article of the Penal Code, the Article 534, that uses the concept of nature to criminalize people for their sexualities and gender. And through that meeting, we thought that an assembly was possibly needed, an assembly of people who could interpret the notion of nature, because it's not a legal concept, it's a pluridisciplinary concept, can be seen from a philosophical view, from an artistic view, from a historical view, and so on. And we, since that year, in 2014, we've gathered different form of assembly with people from different point of view of what nature can be in order to produce the journal, the Against Nato Journal, which will be the final product, in a way, the object, gathering all this interpretation of nature to be given by the hand of the NGOs to judges, to people who can have an impact on that precise law and on the group who are arrested or criminalized for that. So yeah, just maybe as a conclusion, I think the very idea of council relates to political representation and relates to the idea that art has something to say about political representation, and that the council is a form, is an art. To make council is also a form of art.
Can I disagree? But in order to agree with you on a different level, is when you said like nature is not a legal term. I mean, the interesting example, and really go and have a look also, I mean, at everyone's work, but the way, I mean, there's a video by someone, you know, a lawyer or a judge, you know, who defines like something as unnatural, right? So apparently nature is a legal term, you know. So that's my disagreement, because in your work you actually show to what extent legal questions are like really shaping, like as you all know, our reality. So something that was supposed to be the third part of my presentation dealt very much with the question of like we have to deal with, we do not need to produce more and more content, but like our research really needs to go into the kind of infrastructures that actually that rule the game in a way. And with infrastructures, I follow like definitions like Keller Easterling. It's not just bridges and the tube, but it's like computer protocols. It's like legislation about nature. It's safety standards, health codes, and so on. So I think that's what I found very interesting in your work, that you really go into this like very like down under earth actually a level of
That's also maybe because we're not a university. Just to go back to your first argument of university being the producer of research and artistic research as well, is that, or agility or flexibility being not a university, being not such an institution, allows us to be more on the ground and to bring research into action in a way, into production of knowledge, changing mindsets and having possibly an impact. And I don't know. Yeah.
But would you say that your because we're talking about collective intelligence, that what you are working with, your methodology, is less a kind of intelligence of a collective, but like an intelligence of how to put the right collective together for specific questions, you know?
Yeah.
To stress this tension of collective. I mean, afterwards we have a tentative collective, right? So, you know, there's a lot of interesting know-how and variness of this. I mean, a week ago I was still like, collective is good, so that we can rely on, you know? And then I had a look at counts and I thought like, oh, hold on, you know? And then tentative and so the question would be like, so it's an intelligence of which collectives are actually progressive, and how to avoid them becoming representational, suppressive, and so on. Would that make
sense?
Yeah. And yeah, it's the, I don't know, maybe it's the art of is a bit too pretentious, but
the questioning of what makes a collective, and the fact that a collective is always a temporary situation and has to be moving. So it's not a stable form. It has to be always in movement.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I just finished with that. What I just thought was, one cannot really make. I mean, this display of different collaborative forms, the unit, the ensemble, and so on. It's not that one of them is good or bad. You can say like orchestras are very suppressive as well. Of course, there's a hierarchy. The strings are more important than, and so on and so on. So within all of them, in the unit as well, in the corporation, within all of them you have this tension, and depending on what project one is after, a collaborative form might be better, or a unit, and so on. So.
And I guess my comment about governance and organization is a very local. It's talking from the perspective of being here in France and what it means to create a non-for-profit organization, which might not be the same in other parts of the world. So I guess it's relative. Thank you so much. I regret not to stay.
Thank you, Sandra. We might have Gregory along later to keep talking. So, can I hand back to you, Armen, to finish your presentation? If you would like
but
to do so.
It's 45. I was just bluffing. There's nothing here. No, I mean there is a lot more, but basically, I'm also really happy. I mean, I'm not bluffing. There is stuff that I can read, but I'm also happy to have more time for the general discussion. And there's a few polemical remarks on institute to talk about a bit in order to invite all of us to think to what degree all these tentative, temporary, very fragile collectives in all respects, financially, ideologically, personally, geographically fragile collectives, to what extent they need institutions, and on the other hand, institutions need, in order not to become dinosaurs, they need collectives. And that is a kind of knowledge that we have no expertise in that. How institutions, local institutions work with other institutions in a very different geopolitical social context, as well as how difficult it is for bigger institutions to work with small collectives. So, but I might be really selfishly more interested to ask these questions afterwards to you, rather than continuing to read. But I'm happy if I'm promised that I get my honorarium. Otherwise, I read it. Yeah, that's also something that was interesting in the group discussion before, because I asked everyone, okay, so what are you doing here? How long you're staying here? And and as soon as you start asking about financial details, it's why are you asking this? Or as if this has nothing to do. It's part of this. Art is my vocation, right? I mean, why everyone is self-exploiting themselves, because it's they do it for the savior of politics or so. And I think we should start seeing the money aspect or the institutional aspect not as the other of our practice, but actually the core of what we do. So that would have been my amazing plaidoyer, I tell you, for listening. So thanks a lot for listening to me.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. It's a very special set of people. I've seen the whole exhibition. And Catherine, you put together a really amazing intervention here. I want to share with you some of my unease that I've been having over these two concepts. One is collaboration. The second is the idea of the collective. The unease, so what I'm going to do is, Sarai, which I'm part of, was a form that emerged working on new media, when new media was really very new. And a lot of the ideas that I'm going to throw at you are going to come from a world of new media and networks. So just to start, in 2002, one of the many exhibits that curious visitors encountered during Documenta 11 in Kessel was an installation called Opus from India. Opus, or Online Platform for Unlimited Signification, very long title, was a collaborative software program whose design was inflected with the radical network utopianism of the free software community. this image is a fiction. It's a fiction because I can't show you the program. The program is obsolete. And this is one of the ideas that I want to talk about. An image speaking in the place of a program. Opus's conceptual thrust summarizes this very well, and this is what we wrote at that time. Opus is an environment in which every viewer and producer is also invited to be a circulator. You can view and download material, you can transform it, and upload the material worked on by you back to the Opus domain. This was 12 years ago, long time ago. So there's a specially created license. Opus sought to open critiques of authorship and models of property in the art world. A special conference, Opus initiated conference in Documenta 11, debated intellectual property, authorship, and the art market. And I remember speaking in that and the rage that came out from the community. Emerging well before the like everything frenzy of Web 2.0 soft neoliberalism and interface-driven capitalism of today, Opus was really seen at that time as a political aesthetic intervention. More than anything, Opus was a public announcement of a new initiative in South Asian contemporary art. So Opus was produced by the Rux Media Collective, who were co-initiators of the Sarai program, so 5 of us. Opus, I think, reflected the design of the Sarai had, which departed from many elements in traditional national models. So Opus references the older model of collection of the 1990s, real flush of the 1990s, and opened up a model of collaboration. It also, I think, intimated a new model of infrastructure driven by technology. So I want to say this, that 12 years after Opus, the idea of collectivity, the idea of collaboration, the idea of creativity have radically changed. This can't be made today. It won't make any sense. And why is this so? There's a new circulation engine in place today. With the rise of the mobile phone is concurrent, which all of you have and I have, with the design of Web 2.0, with a premium on user-driven media and aggregation through platforms, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. This is not a collection, this is an aggregation. The phone is a significant player in developing models of user-driven infrastructure and citizenship based on transparency and permanent publicity. So, personalization is integral to the economy of experience in the web since 2005. And it transforms the way information is gathered and shared, and all of us already know this. 3 elements are there in personalization. The search, one scholar calls this the waning of anticipation, because search has transformed our lives. User-generated media, and a model of surveillance that is the new normal. Right? So by creating navigation through association and interconnection, the radical artist dream of the 1990s, by creating navigation through association and interconnection, Google transformed computing power to the internet. It transferred computing power to the internet, so that all phones, your phones can compute in the way computers did in the 1990s, rather than taxing individual machines. All those machines that we had, which used to get so hot and burn out, 2 machines crashed when we were making this. Now this move significantly signals a transformation of internet time as imagined by social media. So circulation has now taken command. Within a temporality of ceaseless transit, a culture of the indeterminate that resists representation. So we are caught today in this state, and I'm quoting a very important scholar. She says we're caught in a state of animated and animating suspension that forces itself on consciousness. You just can't escape every second. And the clarity of closure, I think, is impossible. Life is a series of updates, friends, likes, constant stream of information, lifestyle, political opinion, individual popularity. Search engines rank pages, individual stardom, and political spectacle. In this public culture of temporality, writes Carlo Cardoff, the present is perceived as a series of disruptive events, the spectacular and the catastrophic, rather than the structural and the chronic, have become the mark of time. Now, what does this do to the world that we built? So this circulation engine has challenged the models of liberal social theory. So this imaginary public sphere, designating the community of the revelry of strangers online, is now in turmoil. So digital infrastructures, what do digital infrastructures do? They mobilize the fiction of stranger revelry online while simultaneously facilitating and encouraging and integrating online environments. The fiction of user individuality, while aggregation, the more you aggregate, the more you collect, the more you produce value. So the transformation of value based on experience is here. So if the concept of the public always claimed a certain ambiguity between observation and participation, production and consumption, today's media environments make these distinctions really irrelevant. There's a growing indistinction between accessing media-based content and providing it to states and private companies. So this explosion of our personal and social identity into this public realm renders the stranger model all the more tenuous, denying the obscurity needed to protect these forms of life. So this was actually the organizing mythic of Opus. We meet, we collaborate. So the social imaginary of the post-digital public promotes relations among friends, not strangers. A larger and more open question is the transformation of collectivity in the post-media landscape. In some of the more gloomier Western readings of the post-Web 2.2 landscape, so collectivities are measured up and seen wanting against the old modernist model of stranger sociality, fracturing of radical contingency, and a political tied to public speech. You have to speak publicly, otherwise you have no politics. So unsurprisingly, if you speak to the older generation, it's a very familiar catalogue of negatives. A receding political in the midst of permanent publicity, a solidarity dispersed by permanent personalization, compromised politics, etc., etc. Now, I don't take this line. I don't take this line. And we'll see why. What's happening to memory? The other dream of the past. So Wendy Chun, So Wendy Chun, a scholar whom I actually like, she argues that new media simultaneously races towards the future and the past, towards what Wendy calls the bleeding edge of obsolescence. So what does she mean by this? Memory today is conflated with storage. The digital memory, as we know, with its constant degeneration. Remember, I couldn't show you Opus because the OS is obsolete. It was built on an OS that doesn't exist. The bulk of 1990s net art today is not accessible because the OS, the operating systems don't exist. So the constitutive obsolescence of new media is coupled with the fiction of eternity. So therefore, it's an enduring ephemeral. So digital media complicates this relationship, the rhetoric of the cloud, by making the permanent into an enduring ephemeral. So here we have actually outsourced large parts of our everyday search to networks. This is the reality today. The media theorist Mark Hansen suggests that 21st century media propel us in what he calls a logic of feed forward. We are feeding towards the future. So where humans today rely on technologies to perform operations on which they have no direct access whatsoever and correlate to no recognizable human facility. So he calls this the bypassing of consciousness. As anticipation has now been delegated to machines. This is the most beautiful thing that we treasured, anticipation. the ambiguity of the future has now been delegated to machines through search. I mean, not a second of our lives goes away without searching. Ways to go, Wikipedia questions. So search is the waning of anticipation. So digital networks have radically rearranged what was designated as the human sensorium, right? In ways we could not imagine 12 years ago. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. Now, look, this is where I want to shake us up a little. A good part of contemporary writing recalls some of the most horrific predictions of 1950s science fiction. If you go back to old comics, with machines taking over the planet. You know, the machines have taken over the planet, this is the end. More seriously, I think these narratives conveniently bypass the scenario in much of the non-Western world. You know, the West lives in its own bubble. Where actually populations outside the West, and I suspect in the West too, in Paris too, inhabit what I call a disjunctive sensory infrastructure. We now live in this sensory infrastructure again and again, where value comes from experience. The biggest companies today are media companies, Google, Facebook, etc., etc. Not US Steel, General Motors, right? So what I want to do is, I want to focus in the second half on the rearrangement of politics and aesthetics and the address of infrastructure. All of us are invested in this address of infrastructure because we have a phone in our pocket. We rely on machines to manage and impact our sensorium. For me, a key aesthetic strategy is how do we actually work within these techniques, right? Let me just give you a little thumbnail of what's going on in the post-colonial world, and we'll come back to this question. One of the most interesting things that happened in the post-colonial world was the first crisis that new networks opened up. And when Sarai emerged, I'm actually a witness to this myself. So you have a crisis of sovereignty. You have it in the West now. You have a real crisis of sovereignty. Who is going to control networks? So post-colonial urban governance operated within a code, this is in the 50s, 60s, 70s, that separated the social and the medial. So welfare and government managed the population, where the media, things dealing with media were things censors did. Art, television, cinema, censors dealt with them, regulators dealt with them. This management, this clear division, through authorized circulation. So the task of sovereignty is to manage different forms of circulation and to legalize it. So you authorize circulation through censorship, through regulation. This management of public affect through authorized circulation has broken down all over the post-colonial world. Everyone has a phone now. Yes. And it disrupts older transactions between sovereign power and a population seen as susceptible to sensory powers. That's what they thought in the old days. Today, unregulated forms of media, audio, video, images, have begun to circulate from a post-colonial populations only seen as political actors. They could vote in elections and that was it. So the older model of the social in the post-colonial world, and here too, lies in ruins. So you have a visceral media archive. The censors don't work anymore. You have a visceral media archive that has emerged from all walks of life. Political activists, transparency campaigners, jilted lovers, we know that story, torturers, ordinary citizens with camera-equipped phones. This is the new entanglement of politics and aesthetics. Now, this is what happens. You see how the crisis is opening up. And it's a very productive crisis. So this whole model that was indexed to the stable arrangement of people and things, management of hierarchy, management of stability, And that has obviously broken down. The infrastructure for this is in California. The servers are in California. And everyone feels the crisis. If it's the French Culture Ministry, courts in India, local police, everyone feels this. Right? So you have a problem. What do you do when social political actors are also media proliferators? These are people who vote and then they share media. So Michael Warner, the philosopher Michael Warner, points, I think, to a very interesting, he calls the fruitful perversity of all modern publicity. He says, once initiated, acts abandon initiated audiences and face the risk of dispersal, misuse and escape. So we've had this loop-like movement that infects all media circulation, where media objects move in and out of infrastructure. And you see this in this exhibition too. They move in and out of infrastructures. They may attach themselves to something, create an event, and then they move out. They move into spectacular time, move into micro time. So in much of the non-Western world, this infrastructure began with video. The rise of video in the 1980s really came at sovereignty. So what you have is the opening up of subaltern uses of infrastructure, where poorer populations who have access to video and later phones come into this new infrastructure. So the anthropologist Igor Kopytov had spoken of the many lives of commodities as they move in and out of circulation. Media objects like audio and video take on multiple lives as they move in diverse time-space configurations. And you have different forms of subjectivity playing out. So you have vast amounts of media now, moving not from the state, not from official institutions, but from populations that were not designed to be so. The entire 19th century model of sovereignty lies in ruins, and the social lies in ruins. But I think there's more to this. So the art historian Ina Blom suggests that video as a technology challenges the narrative of artist-centered histories of contemporary art. And it's a really remarkable argument, where she says video's cycles of repeatedly scanning challenges the idea that cultural memory was based on stable modes of inscription. So video's malleability, and we knew this, video's malleability and instability made it a dynamic medium that anticipated digital media. So a lot of early contemporary art was invested in video for precisely these reasons. Now, but Ina Blom argues, and I quote, she says, by foregrounding the technical conditions under which the past is conserved in the present, video presents us with a definition of memory that does not locate it in this or that practice. Right? Disjunctive infrastructure. So video is thus an actant, to use a Latourian shorthand. It's an actant. It triggers new events. It's an archive in motion that inaugurates new capacities and connections. This is what I mean. Objects that set up new connections as they circulate. You see this, all kinds of new mobilizations and activities emerge from media. So you have I want to share with you some of the things that begin emerging. This is some of the stuff that begins emerging. So chief among this were the low-cost, video superstar parody films like VHS Kalucha from Tunisia, Superman of Malegaon, made by unemployed workers in India. You have the underground Chinese classic pirated copy made in 2004. Love, Sex and Dhoka, Dibakar Banerjee's wonderful film from India, which positioned itself as an archaeology. If you see this, it's completely archaeological, referencing the handheld, CCTV and Sting video. So it's really a whole feature film made through these forms, right? And it comes out of this whole experience of living through 2 decades of a disjunctive infrastructure. So, but if video is not a technology, but an agency, it is not long before contemporary artists in the South began engaging with the aesthetics and questions of mobile video. So notable among these, and one of my favorites, is Ravi Sundaram's performance, The Pixelated Revolution in Documented 13, using Syrian resistance video to revisit perception. So video is kind of an actant here. So what he does is he engages Syrian resistance YouTube handheld videos shot on mobile phones, videos that are far from the conventional aesthetics of filmmaking. So he produces an aesthetic manifesto that engages with truth-making, a trace of death, and a poetics of mobile infrastructure. So you're creating a chain of capacities. Right? In 2013, a Mumbai artist collective camp followed a local ship of sailors from Kutch in Western India across the region as they co-mingled with sea proletarians from Balochistan, Iran and Sindh. So the project, which I'll show you, and this is the closing, Gulf to Gulf to Gulf, tracked the movement of commodities, local ships, sailors across the contemporary turbulent geographies of the Indian Ocean. So they are actually connecting an imaginary geography. Before nation states existed, people traded across the oceans. There were no passports, goods circulated. So today all of this is rendered illegitimate because of sovereignty. You know, people spoke many languages, sailors spoke. So what camp did was actually using the handheld sailors' cell phone videos, which the sailors used to mix to music. So the archive of the project was a landscape of these new video forms which end up creating new chains of association. So these are remixed Bollywood tunes that they would remix to their cell phone videos and share using Bluetooth between ships. It is a particular Nokia phone, the N96, I think, which had a very strong Bluetooth connection. So they didn't have Wi-Fi, obviously. So you see, you're not going to have Wi-Fi. So you use this infrastructure to set up, parallel networks, things artists dream of. So the project Gulf to Gulf to Gulf so tracks this, and it actually builds these connections between sailing routes, death and life of ships, work time and dream time, and really addresses this whole thing of the poetics of infrastructure. So to conclude, so we witness a time of disjunctive infrastructures. Disjunctive infrastructures may expand exponentially during crisis, but they leak, and this is very important, they leak and attach themselves to other environments or to other platforms. So what is interesting is the provisional, always unfinished nature of contemporary media infrastructures offer both promise and danger. They offer both promise and danger to populations and critical thought. And this combination is very important, because with the transformation of experience, because all value is now coming from experience for capitalism, this is a very, very fraught move that we have been on. So it's this moving in and out of infrastructures that I want to end with. And this, I think, is one of the most interesting possibilities. And you see these different flows of circulation in the exhibition itself, if you go carefully through the exhibition. The different flows that are mapped out. And it's precisely on the subject of flows that I want to open up the discussion with you guys. So do you want to go to your thing?
We don't have a present.
You have your PDF?
Yeah, no.
Nothing?
Yeah.
No.
Are you going to ask us a more
Yes.
specific question?
Yes. I'm going to ask you guys. One of the remarkable things that I saw from your 5-channel video was, and I want to talk to both. Maybe you should come here. One is some model of an urban delirium. And there's a model of an urban delirium where one of the elements of an urban delirium is different cadences that move through this sound. Sound is a player, to use a short term. It's an actant. It takes on. It's creating space, as we saw. Right? And then there are these different characters who are bringing in notions of loss. They're bringing in notions of doing things, affirming things, and even there, as we've discussed before, there are two who are kind of making their own world, and in the second part, you see new forms of circulation coming in, of global capital, different knowledge forms coming in. How do you want to talk about your experience in doing this in Karachi?
Okay. So I think we'll start a bit with what you're saying. So maybe a little bit. I don't know how many of you have actually seen the video yet. Throughout, there are 4 narratives playing it. And the cadences that you're talking about, so if you notice, we start with a very personal and direct narrative where the protagonist is engaging with you in a more direct manner, and it shifts in the other narratives where it goes into one is a bit indifferent, and then the other goes into a more nostalgic mode, and then there's an abrupt cut where it becomes very mechanical and shifting into new infrastructures. So it's the idea was also to the order was also formed in a way of starting from personal aspirations of an individual who's aspiring to be something and is hopeful, and then it shifts onto these other narratives which are perhaps establishing or on their way down in a downward spiral. And then it connects to this entire, it kind of zooms out into aspirations of the city and these circulations which are in play and in a way which are once again playing parallel to sovereignties that you mentioned, because there's this almost this is an informal sector of circulation which is quite it's quite major, and it exists in parallel to life and business in the city. And also it is interesting because this circulation is working with all that is discarded. So it is the waste that comes from the city. It's domestic, and it's from shipbreaking, so it's foreign and local waste, and which then in turn after being sorted and sifted, it goes back into the market. So once again it talks about these different aspirations starting from the individual onto a more larger scale. Would you like to add?
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things about working in Karachi is also that there's a desire for infrastructure, no matter what class you're from. So there's a desire for roads, there's a desire for internet speed. And in our video, which starts with a poet who has a desire to be published within the circulation of paper or the internet, there's this desire to be circulated and to enter infrastructure really very intensely, even though he is very aware of the fact that he probably isn't going to make it. Some of his poetry alludes to that. And ironically, he's also a real estate agent, so he's going back and forth between these really interesting relationships between the land, between value of his time in certain fields versus what he really wants to spend his time doing. Then towards the end of the film, when we look at metal scrapyard and junkyard, we're talking about this need to have an informal infrastructure. The people who are talking about this informal infrastructure have their own language of speaking about waste, but from a place of value. So everything like their own terminology for a collection of copper objects could be called bhangar, which could also refer to an item that is sprinkled on food to give it good flavor. But that would also refer to something that's really valuable that will eventually go into the copper industry in China to make cables to create connections on the web. And it's just really interesting that from the very, very intimate poet who wants, and he's working class poet, to the man working in this waste junkyard who's extremely wealthy, yet looks like he's working class, there's this desire to kind of be very fluent in these infrastructures. And at the same time, because they're sort of informal and because they write illicit poetry, because they almost are on the border of smuggling with some of these items in the junkyard, they also need certain distance and invisibility at times from the government or from surveillance or from certain kinds of publicity that you talked about earlier.
So one of the questions I had was about the way value making emerges. So one of the big differences between, I would say, it's an immediate difference between, say, South Asia and, say, many countries in the West is we don't address the state. The state is not an addressee at all. The state is someone who only sends the cops or comes in to disrupt. So the state cannot be an addressee either because it's indifferent or because it's repressive. You have to create your own addressee, right? And this is very clear because the state in Pakistan or India or many parts of the world is indifferent. And neoliberal states are equally the same all over the world. So so here what was most interesting for me was the way value suddenly changes in the scrapyard. So here is one of Asia's biggest scrapyards. So there are ships coming from Poland, from all over the world to the scrapyard. There are different forms of value making, which is so interesting. Here you have these local guys who are breaking metal, who have some judgment. This is this much metal, this is that much metal. And suddenly this London Metal Exchange comes in, and it probably has an app which all these traders start using. So you have the transformation of value making, which comes through networks, which is here, this is the most proletarian of spaces in Karachi.
So the protagonist in that particular scene talks about how all the money they made was before the LME, the London Metal Exchange, came in. So he said all the money we made was from 1995 to 2004, and then after that everybody has LME on their phones, so we can no longer negotiate on the basis of our estimates, which was all, a game of, I can estimate in this lot that I've received, I might have 3 tons of useful copper. And then you can look at it and you can say, well, I think, no, I'm not going to give you so much money. But now if you say, okay, I'm going to charge you 100 rupees, and the guy looks at his phone and said, today London is selling it for, 95. That is really fascinating, that actually the desire for infrastructure is also countered by a desire to step away from it.
The other question I had was on this notion of, because a lot of your work is urban, So do you see yourself as an artist group that navigates the city, or for you these new urban forms are also forms that you think you should address, and your forms of collaboration, your forms of circulation that you attend to also comes from these thematic interests?
I think, as our name suggests, tentative is a constantly shifting model, and I think that with each project, I think we often start with certain concerns or certain ideas that we are interested in, and then it's kind of the subject which guides us as to what position we are going to take. So we are interlocutors, or we are facilitators, or we are artists, or we are curators. So it really shifts. Like, we do navigate the city, but it is in these very different, personas of what we are addressing and how we are going about it. So it's been a channel video which is not about Karachi, which is not representing Karachi,
but which is some kind of a visceral experience that we enjoyed, and we hope that somehow by being in the space, it will be transferred non-linearly, or without it being a summary of the city. I think just to add that, you might have noticed the other projects that we have done, and if all of you have seen our website, you will notice as well that there's an ephemerality in our work and all that we do, which has also, like that nature of the work has also shifted in this, because there's a certain permanence. Because usually what we are working is that, it's more as adding a layer into the architecture of the city or infrastructures and just moving on. So it never leaves, like a mark behind in that way. But this work will be on for the next 2 months. So this is also something, a new model that we are exploring now, a new mode that we have entered. Yeah.
To come back to that, I think from what you said, being here, I think this is a problem for a lot of non-Western artists collectives. On the one hand, you don't have venues to show your work. Back home, you don't have venues. It's impossible. There's no funding space. There's police problem. There's something or the other. And on the other hand, exactly like the metal breakers who get yoked into this global modes of circulation in the London Metal Exchange, circulation has a kinesis. It brings new forms of value, and it's unfortunate. Art is part of global circulation since the 16th century. I mean, let's face it. So this is, I think, part of the problem. I think we need to address it. One of the things Sarai was attacked for when we began was that we are too international, and we were confidently international. We had no problem, and all the nationalists attacked us because we knew new media was international. You had to be open about it. But it's a bit of a problem that there's no venue to show stuff, and it is something we need to talk about.
Yeah.
You want to say something?
We were just saying that maybe it's a good time fairly soon to open it up and see if anyone else has comments or questions.
I think this is a good question to open it up, because I think this question also refers to all the other collectives from around the world who have different modes of working, and if you would like to add something.
Don't particularly, I have two microphones, so it's confusing what to do with it. So, just because we only have 50 minutes left, maybe it's disruptive, but there's another term here, intelligent, we just somehow took for granted, And if you, when philosophers don't know what to do, it's the etymology again. It's an interesting combination. It's inter, it's the between, and ligens, it's legere, it's reading, but initially collecting, right? So there is a collecting. I mean, there's a doubling even in the title. Maybe that's why we don't talk about it, because it seems so obvious. And with all these, also with regards to council, which is such an interesting archival work as well, both the juridical archive, but botanical archive, and with the things you were talking about, this global distribution. So we were talking about two things: the global, how did you call it? The global circulation, that's new, and then you were a bit dismissive, and rightly so, polemical against this 1950s. Gloomy ideas about artificial intelligence taking over. But my question is a bit in that direction. What kind of intelligence is collective? Is it a kind of savior against artificial intelligence taking over? Or I think we all agree that that's not as simple, but like what makes it specific? If it's more than just adding like several intelligences, as if that makes us give us a higher IQ or so, you know. So what is this collecting practice of collecting intelligence that is different now and maybe necessary? If that's the working hypothesis of also this exhibition or the Cosmopolis, that was the idea that you have announced.
I pop in. I'm sorry, I was not there in the beginning, but Sandra was there, and we are a collective, so we can change places. No, I had the same question a few days ago when I was in a workshop with some students, and so we spent like some time to really try to describe what is a kind of intelligence, or I would say knowledge. I know that it is not the same word, but that we are producing when we are like, maybe I should look at you, when we are doing a council, or which kind of any kind of council it is. And I think there is three key notions. One is maybe the more complicated one, is about what we can call an ecosystem of practice. Basically, if you can take, for example, let's take the example of a parliament. And in a parliament, you have people who are supposed to be representative of the whole population. And of course, some people come and they have not only to give their opinion, but they have to say something that has a certain value, a certain truth. So in order to say this, they need to build the whole infrastructure before coming. So they have experts, they have a whole infrastructure of knowledge. So that's one thing that we have when we act as a collective, because we don't only come with one opinion, and in council it's very clear that we have people who are supposed to be representative of something in the table, so they come with a knowledge that is not only there. Another notion, of course, is translation. And translation is not about translation between one language to another, it's also translation between fields and discipline. Because when you are around a table and you have one scientist, one religious leader, and one lawyer, when they begin to talk, they don't use the same word, even if they speak the same language. So you have to have some people to mediate, and of course the mediation is not neutral. You are always transforming the message when you're doing this. And the third notion for me is the negotiation. Negotiation is because when you are in this situation, it's all about the way you organize the negotiation, the relation of power, the way you will lead this very complicated relation of forces between the people who are in this space. And it is not an easy thing, and it is a kind of war sometimes. And it's not totally peaceful to do this. And so that's, I would say, if there is I don't know what it is producing. If it is producing more, I think it is, maybe it is also connected to some thought of people like Chantal Mouffe, for people who are thinking that the making of the knowledge is also as important maybe as what you produce. But that's it.
I add something to the question. Intelligence is not just like something in our brain, but producing intelligence, like intelligence agencies, secret services, they producing an intelligence. Producing intelligence means informing somebody in order that this somebody, a government, whatever, can act. So intelligence is a very specific knowledge, namely one that enables to act. So this practical element that you mentioned, the transformative element, and even the negotiation one, is deeply ingrained in the concept of intelligence itself. Knowledge is not the same as intelligence. We can have a lot of knowledge which does make us act. So one reading of collective we need to come up with.
If I may add, perhaps one of the readings of collective intelligence could be the way one feels when we're around from other parts of the world which have similar experiences to our own, and dissimilar experiences, and have opportunities to use a very overused term, conviviality. I think one of the intelligences that we felt from it was just the cadence of the relationships between people, how everybody had a rhythm of working, and when we were eating together or cooking together, there's a certain kind of indescribable, non-rational feeling that gets transmitted, and that's an intelligence that's hard to kind of quantify. I don't know how else to say.
I'm the skeptic. To rethink what intelligence is, a large part of knowledge making is now being delegated, which makes interesting ideas, where things are in flux. And I think things are really in flux. The machines are not yet taking over the earth. I think this opens up all kinds of things, which you can open up, about time, about how we inhabit the earth, or what kind of forms that go into. People are working on metal, people are working on cable networks. There are all kinds of things that can come up.
Just a short observation. So, with media connections in the US, in Europe, it's very different than our parts of the world. We have this internet cable that comes from Dubai, and it gets pulled by men in shalwar kameez and chappals through the beach, sea view, and get attached by this very fragile machine to the rest of the city. And it literally looks like a completely unintelligent way of doing something, but is the complete opposite of that, because it's jugaru, it's like a locally earned and understood intelligence, which may not make sense to anybody else, but it works. It works in that context. So intelligence is many things.
No, I want to put question on intelligence, multiple intelligence, and crisis of sovereignty. Because when you talk about collective intelligence, intelligence of assembly, intelligence of connecting, and it's here in your practice, what we practice today. But at the same time, as artist and performer, you speak intelligence of the situation, intelligence of the urban culture, intelligence of the cultural performance. So, what I observe is double intelligence moving together, and each one has the capacity and the difficulty to combine these two sorts of intelligence. Perhaps it's better to think in that way, because it's double side. The good side, we could appear more powerful. We have to develop more capacity, like the opus we can see today. We say more puissant, more sovereign. But at the same time, the intelligence of circulation could be accelerating and destabilizing your orientations. So there's a struggle. But it's a struggle, is it a struggle of power or a struggle of puissance? Capacity of action, you see? I have a question. So I put a question to you. You speak crisis of sovereignty. I agree, it's crisis of sovereignty on state. But the other side, we are more powerful. We can develop more collective action, connected action, like Arabic Revolution. So it's better to keep the two sides by deepening the different dimension of intelligence today. I agree, collective intelligence, but along its material, there's an artificial intelligence, simulation system, modulation system. You can be a very destructive power. But on the other side, we have multiple intelligence coming to combine. So as a human being, you have to be more, you push each one to be more responsive.
I like this term that you used of thinking about capacities. So for me, living in networks it shouldn't be seen as paralyzing, but actually opening up critical knowledges of thinking about capacity. What forms of capacity open up critique? Otherwise, we would get into this paralytic thing where nothing we can do. They're limited, or we would animate an older model, ventriloquize an older model which is not going to go anywhere. So you see all kinds of interesting experiments taking place. You have all kinds of interesting experiments. It's not the first time, but people did it in the late 1960s and early 1970s. There were groups that opened this up. But right now, I think the question of capacity, so linked to this is the question of capacity. What capacities lead to what intelligence?
One last question.
Merci. Je vois qu'il y a beaucoup de très belles intentions et que, en fait, tout le monde cherche à comprendre le problème, à se rapprocher des lieux oubliés. La question, c'est que quand on cherche à illustrer ou justifier ou expliquer pourquoi on fait ça, on se réfère toujours à des modèles qui sont l'informatique et la communication, les modèles de communication. Alors, pendant que vous parliez, j'avais un autre modèle en tête, et c'était le modèle financier. Vous voyez, si on prend le modèle que vous décrivez, et on prend le modèle des subprimes, je vois exactement une coïncidence parfaite. Aussi, les gens qui vendaient des subprimes allaient dans les quartiers populaires et disaient « Ah, t'as pas d'argent, viens, on te donne un peu. » Et ils ont constitué exactement, comment on peut dire, des collections, ou des situations, qu'après on a appelé SICAV. Voilà. Je vois que maintenant, les projets, c'est presque constitué des SICAV culturels. Parce que, excusez-moi, les cadres, comme vous décrivez les cadres politiques généraux, ça me semble vraiment inapproprié. Quand vous dites société post-coloniale, je voudrais demander à un aborigène de l'Australie si lui pense être dans une société post-coloniale.
So, if I briefly try to invent a translation. Monsieur said that his impression was that when he was listening to our discussion in general, that when we're looking for forms of collective intelligence, the mode or the paradigm of thinking, I was focused on translating it. I have no answer.
I think you should, it's difficult for me to say about finance because I'm right now working on money. And money interests me because cash. I'll explain what I'm doing, and if that helps you. Cash, the cash economy. So a lot of Asia works on cash. Things you can touch. It's tangible. It has a different materiality. India, China, Africa, the Arab world all work through cash economies. So networks want to move cash economies to media money. Bitcoin, wallets, and they're using that intelligence to, disturb the older cash circulation. That's what I'm working on now. So, some intelligence debates are going to come from there, but I can't say anything more, because I don't know enough. I honestly don't know enough about financial networks beyond a point. So I can't say. You had a question.
5 more minutes, so a quick question that we can answer.
Hello. I don't know if this is like a 5 minutes question, but I've been when we talked this afternoon and when Council talked, it's been raising to me this idea of, and when Ravi talked about the OS system and how this program doesn't run anymore because there's not an OS system that could be running into, I was thinking about this collective intelligence that I think all of the collectives in this exhibition, like we can have like this OS system and we can run this collective intelligence, but I was thinking if like this collective intelligence will clash with other kinds of intelligence, like when you said that someone is street smart and he's really smart in the streets, but then he comes to the academy and he cannot communicate. I was thinking in that to relation to the institution, how does these collectives and how us come to this museum and work with the institution. So how does this institutional intelligence and this collective intelligence manage to work together? And I don't know if this is a question or is more something that I would like to raise a debate like further this week or something like that, but I think it's really interesting to try and understand if these intelligences can work to each other, or do we have to build a bridge to work with another intelligence as the Pompidou or another institution or a Biennale or something like that. I don't know if I was clear.
Can I say one last tiny thing? So capacity, the capacity for breakdown, the capacity to communicate, very human things, but that capacity to communicate is also very machine, and it breaks down just as much, and it fails just as much when operating systems change and upgrade, and as our systems do. So I feel like perhaps a model, a way of thinking about intelligence could be on that, the lowest common denominator of where the breakdowns happen and what the capacity for misunderstanding might be. And perhaps, I don't know if you can gauge it ever, but perhaps there's a way to see, to measure that, to measure the failure of that capacity.
It's not an answer, but it's a kind of taking up your question and nuancing it or making it more complicated. It's not just about institutions clashing, colliding with collectives. Institutions themselves are not like governed by one kind of intelligence. You know, they have very different protagonists, they have very different values, they have very different norms. And if institutions can be defined as a kind of translation process of culture into society, it is never about like one value and like how this is translated, but rather like how this negotiation works within an institution. So in that sense, this collective intelligence, I liked in the discussion before, one of the other members of council, the way she described council, the idea of the council of finding the right specific problem. So it's a very tentative and temporary, like flexible kind of move.
I take the microphone and suddenly. No, in council,
Mesdames et messieurs, il est bientôt 21h. Le musée ainsi que les expositions vont fermer. Nous vous prions de bien vouloir regagner la sortie. Demain, le centre ainsi que les expositions ouvriront à 11h. Nous vous remercions de votre visite et espérons avoir le plaisir de vous accueillir à nouveau très prochainement. Ladies and gentlemen, the museum and the exhibitions are about to close. We invite you to proceed to the exit. Tomorrow, the center and the exhibitions will open at 11. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, it was a kind of answer by Centre Pompidou, and the man has an amazing voice. I never heard about his voice before. The building was speaking, but no. More seriously, I was when we created council, we didn't thought about. Of course, we were creating council because no institution was able to provide us what we were expecting, which is a decent fee and working long time. And basically, no institution can provide us this unless and not being a PhD researcher, because researcher is a job which is different than being a curator or an artist. It's a different work. So basically, there is no infrastructure that we found, but we are not against the institution. We think that this opposition between the autonomous group and the institution is no longer working, because today, and I think it relates to a text you made, you wrote that we should talk later. I think the institutions are too weak to be fought. They are struggling with lots of financial problems. There is lots of political problems in institutions. It's very hard for them to continue to be competitive, and to just to do something. And I don't think it has the same way to work than it was in the 60s or in the 70s and in the moment of institutional critique. And I think the problem now is more about this articulation, how a group like, for example, that what we do, we really try to, we never work with an issue that we bring. We always work with an issue that the institution is bringing, and we react to them all the time, and we try just to bring different way to work with them and to change from the inside how it is working. And maybe we do something which is a little bit on the side, but yeah, it's a collaboration, physically. I look at it as a collaboration.
I'm afraid we're going to have to stop there. This institution has asked us to continue our discussion outside of its walls. But thank you all very much for coming. Thank you to all the presenters. And,